Okay, so the moderator for this panel is Rocky Gansky. And Rocky, I'm going to let you take it away and grab people back to their chairs.
All right. Hey, let's get the panelists up here and get everybody away from the refreshment bar, because we want you to be poking and stabbing all the panelists here, and we can make this as interactive and exciting as we can. So if I can get the panelists to come on up to the stage here, because I'm not doing this alone. It doesn't matter. I'm fine no matter what order you sit down in. So huddle on up close. We are scheduled to run from 2:45 now until 3:35. I hope to get a good 15 to 20 minutes of time from the audience for questions. If you've got questions, please get them prepared. And if you go over time, I want you to turn around and ask the audience, because the panel will be gone, because we have 2 people headed to the airport and I have a board meeting at 5 o'clock. So, so we've got everybody here, and it's actually quite interesting and quite exciting to have the breadth that we have at the table here today. You know, we have a really nice cross-section in the emerging company space here. We have groups that represent biopharma, groups that represent tools, medical devices, nanotechnology at various stages, both within the GTA and outside of the GTA. So it should be an exciting conversation, and hopefully it will fit for those that are emerging companies or growing companies, enlightening with some of the information. For those of you who are here from the government visiting, it's great to have you here, and we're looking forward to actually filling your ears with things that might be beneficial. You know, as I agreed to do this panel, one of the things that's very clear to me, and I had the privilege of sitting in a very similar room in Munich about 3 weeks ago, where they were talking about their life science community and what they needed to do with the government, what they needed to do as companies. And I think we can't be so vain as to think that we're the only ones meeting like this. And it's key for our Ontario companies to be continually retooling themselves, but retooling our public policy, and be retooling the legislative work that we do, so that we can win, and not be here to talk today and then return again next year to talk about the same stuff, because I can tell you that some of these groups out there are doing like we do. They will talk today and they'll talk again in a year, and others are taking action. And it isn't about just maintaining leadership in this space, but staying in the pack, because we all have to compete globally, whether that's for funds, whether that's for product and market, or whether that's for people. So I hope to put that bit of a twist into what we're doing today as well. And we know as companies in this space, clearly you heard earlier today that cash conservatism is key. That applies to the government and all the latest initiatives there. So asking for cash is not something that everyone gets to do. We need to find ways to do things better, both within our companies, the way we bootstrap them, and also of our ask. And so I'm hoping too that the panelists in their asks are thinking about things that can work, and we walk away from here with something that's actionable. So we all know that excellence is a journey and not a destination, so let's kind of keep that in mind. Now, with us here today, and you'll just have to, if you didn't sit in order, we'll just have you kind of raise your hand. So we've got Ilya Tamarov. Is that close enough?
Not even close.
Okay.
It's Ilya Tihomirov.
Okay. That's what I meant to say. So Ilya actually is part of a group called Avid Biologics. It's one of Canada's first companies to concentrate on antibody drug conjugates. They're actually a company that spun out of YM Biosciences in 2011, and it'll be interesting to kind of hear the twist of those that are spun from industry. As we all know, YM was one of the great latest acquisitions here in Ontario, and had a great run, and continues to add value to the Ontario community. So we'll also then Scott, who will be.
Right on, got exact.
Hey, I can say Scott Tanner. So Scott actually is the CTO of what was DVS Sciences and is now known as Fluidigm. And Fluidigm, I know I had a lot of interaction with Fluidigm back in my life science tools days in the States. And it's a very well-respected company that's, I would say, doing very interesting things with single molecule counting, all of which started with a block of plastic with really small holes in it, is the way in which I would have to summarize that. Of course, they have been utilizing some very exciting multi-top technologies to be able to enable that. So I will let Scott add a few points to that as we go along, as we start to some questions. And Don Stewart, I think Don and I just follow each other around. We've been on the, I think, the talk circuit together for too long. But Don actually has a very interesting company that he manages as the chief executive officer of a company called Plantform. And Plantform does some really interesting stuff using plants and the structure of plants to bring biologics and unique protein drugs for unique diseases into the market. And I'll again let Don touch on that a bit. And then Phil Whiting. Phil is the president and CEO of Murex Biotechnologies. Again, they have some nanomaterials that they use that are extracted from corn. So those that aren't being used for food from the last conversation or fuel, they're being used for nanotechnologies via Phil. So lots of use for the corn. And then on the end we have Ann. Viva Scott?
Vivian Scott.
Vivian Scott.
Vivian Scott.
Okay, I didn't put the N in my notes, and that's why I said it wrong. But a real interesting, I actually have been watching a little bit on the website with them, and they have some really interesting ways in which to do brain function assessment, and some really interesting robotic tools and ways to really come down to a unique way of quantifying those tools and come up with some quantitative measures that can be used in science. So I'll let her expand on that a bit. So as we think through this, we've got a whole host of questions that will be able to come from you, but I want to kind of take this one and walk down through the panel and let them address a specific set of questions, each one of them, and then we'll come back to general broad questions. So the first one that I'm going to present, ask Ilya to answer is, he's obviously taken a journey at Avid that's matured since 2011. It was a spin out from YM, and need to really ask him to comment for us on what the challenges were that he faced and others like you are likely to be encountering that they have had to overcome as a spin out of a large corp. And then at the same time, kind of what access to capital in the way of human capital may have impacted or been helpful to the challenges that you've had. And if you could comment on those for us, and any other challenges you want to add in, or anything that I've left off, update the group.
Sure.
And we'll go from there.
Thank you. So, yeah, I think our story has this very interesting aspect that our company has been incubated within YM, our company and the technology, and that had some very important benefits for us. Specifically, we were able to mature the technology for a couple of years, get some proof of principle data before we actually took the leap and spun it out into a standalone entity. And of course, being within an established company, we had access to resources and also a very adventurous executive team that was willing to take a risk on some new and adventurous technologies that we're developing now. So that resulted in us building a very strong and solid foundation with which to start. So I would say that that's a very important benefit that we've realized, and that served us very well in ability to raise our seed round of financing, and then also have a network of advisors from all over the world that we had to rely on going forward. I mean, just to give you a little bit of a sense for the company, we're very much a startup biotech company where we picked a very specific niche where we're marrying the selectivity of biologics with potency and the anti-cancer activity of small molecule drugs. So it's a marriage of both biologics and small molecules in one package. So that requires very specialized skills, and without the initial backing of YM to establish this network of specialists from all over the world, it would have been extremely challenging to establish our R&D programs and develop them further. I would say, so those are the benefits. I think one challenge that we've encountered specific to us is that our IP actually came from YM, or as a result of the collaboration with the National Research Council of Canada. And what we found is most programs, grant programs or applications, they've actually tailored, in many instances, to academic IP. So we were not able to access a lot of the programs available in the community because of that very specific requirement, and we felt it was a little bit unfair. Now, so I think that would be the challenge. I think maybe I'll start off with a little bit of positive, though. I think, I don't mean to sound critical, because we have tremendously benefited from a lot of policies that exist in our community, and our most recent financing actually involved, I would say, most of the players in the community that came together to support us going forward. And I would maybe specifically with HR, I would highlight one program that we've benefited from very significantly. I think positive information has a lot of value. So the positive information is the Ministry of Research and Innovation has a business accelerator program. And through that program, we've been able to tap into 3 key people on our team right now. One was a Canadian IP agent that helped us determine freedom to operate around our technology. Critical, absolutely critical piece of information that enabled us to close the financing. Similarly, we've been able to access people who founded the entire field that we work in, and now these people are joining our board of directors. And also, some critical expertise in manufacturing, and these people are now training some Canadian scientists that have working on our team. That resulted. So this is how we've been able to address some of the lack of specific knowledge within Canada on this particular area through this Ministry of Research of Innovation and Innovation program called Business Accelerator Program. Yeah.
Thank you. So, Scott, we'll pick on you for a moment. Scott's an interesting guy, had an interesting role in that most of the folks we kind of moved from academia into industry, and Scott decided to go the other way on that one-way road and actually move from industry into academia. So, Scott, if you could both give us some color on that, but at the same time, I know you've given a lot of thought and have some additional thoughts on, as we raise funds outside of Ontario, what complications does that create for us as Ontario companies, and some thoughts that you may have around that?
Terrific. Well, thanks a lot, Rocky. Yeah, I never do anything normally, right? So we start in industry, spent 25 years at a company called SciEx, which was itself was a spin-out from the University of Toronto. Came up with a really good idea that the company couldn't support, and so my entire research group decided that we would leave and find another way to do it. A little bit like Ilya, we conceived of the IP while we were at the company, but we did not reduce it to practice. We then interviewed a bunch of universities and found a home. And a little bit of the story around that, In the past, there's been a thought that industrial scientists are fat, greedy cats. And I was a little bit worried trying to get into the university that would limit us. In fact, it didn't. Perhaps because that image has gone away, or perhaps because some of the academics have become fat, greedy cats. Not clear which way that goes. But that didn't turn out to be a limitation for us. So we had really good talks with a number of universities. It came down finally at U of T. There was a bid placed by all the faculties about who would house us. And we moved first of all into biomedical engineering, and then 3 years later moved into chemistry. And that's really important because chemistry gave us both our facility and our basis for developing our technology. So in the university, we developed the IP, further developed the IP, protected that IP, and then the university, the Department of Chemistry, had a really very supportive position in incubating my type of company. There finally came a point where we wanted to be bigger than we were. We could sell 1 or 2 instruments out of our incubation laboratory, but we actually want to be global, and that means you need money. And so we chose the very wise time of 2007 to 2010 to try to raise money, which, you know the story on that one. But our experience really was we spent a long time in the Canadian VC community, and partially that's because I'm so strongly Canadian that I want this technology not only to be recognized Canadian, but to benefit back to Canada. And we're not able to get the money in Canada. And to be perfectly fair, there's good reasons for that. So the tools business, so the business that we were developing was a technology that enabled, it's an analytical tool that measures many proteins simultaneously in single cells. And the history, the evolutionary history of entrepreneurs building businesses around that is actually not that great. Hewlett and Packard did it, but not a lot of people since, not in a really big scale. And so I can see a little bit of trepidation. We ended up going to the States to raise some money, mostly in the States, and that scripted an exit. And that really was my fundamental challenge, that if you decide that you're going to need the money to be global, and we did, then we raised money in the States, that scripts an exit, which is likely going to involve a US partner. Right? And I was really fortunate, I got to say, that the venture capital group that we worked with, we got to choose a little bit. There is some money out there, so it's not a complete desert in funding. But we chose a group that was actually really supportive of our Canadian perspective of wanting to stay and benefit from the talent that we had in Canada. And really our strengths in Canada were primarily our talent. We had a superb group of people who understood our technology. And then the exit also was the same. Fortunately, my venture capital partners who were Silicon Valley based, at least paid attention to me when I said I really want to stay in Canada. And I don't want to entertain a bid that's going to move me off-site. And so we found Fluidigm, and Fluidigm was actually a really marvelous partner for us. Fluidigm is a company that had developed a reputation as being a single-cell genomics company. We developed a reputation as being a single-cell proteomics company, and the combined company then becomes a single-cell biology company that is complementary and not competitive. And therefore, the proteomics group, which is my group in Canada, can stay in Canada, can continue to build R&D in Canada. So I'll leave it at that for the time being.
Great. So Don?
Try that one?
I'll try this one. Don is one of the folks on the panel I know that has been both in his current role and past roles long enough that he's seen several programs here in Ontario come, several programs go, some of which have been beneficial, some of which we've gotten rid of that maybe we wish we hadn't have, and others that we'd like to see in the future. So I would like, if you could, Don, just share that experience a little bit and how that kind of set and maybe helped you at Platform and in your past.
Yeah, thanks, Rocky. I think there's 2 different types of funding that we're looking for government. One type is technology related, and the other is investment related. And our experience has been the technology funding has worked well for us. We're have been very well supported by IRAP, particularly on the CHTD program, where we've secured over $1 million in funding from that program. Some of the smaller programs like MyTax and Insert to bring in postdocs, people who can do specific jobs, have been very beneficial to us. I'd say our company was started with a small grant from OCE, Market Readiness, and to give you an idea of the scope of the different things, it was $125,000. I've just secured funding with a partner in Brazil to start up a joint venture there, and we secured 1.7 million US to start the company. So there is a big difference between the way different governments are looking at how they're investing in technology, and particularly the life science sector. On the investment side, we have a rather fractured relationship when it comes to investment and the government. There are some programs which have been excellent, which, like Rocky mentioned, tend to be shut down. There was a good program that matched angel investment at, I think it was like 30 cents on the dollar. And when we started the company, like my friend here, with spectacularly bad timing in 2008, that did help us actually secure investors, because they know they're getting a lift on the money they're investing in the company. And then FedDev have a program, or had a program, that would match 50% investments where you needed a term sheet. We had a term sheet, but the brokerage we were dealing with exploded, and it took us time to develop a term sheet with a different organization for investment. But the programs are not flexible, and so they're matched to specific timeframes, and so we were not able to take advantage of what would have been a $750,000 lift on an investment that we did secure. But we weren't able to match that because we were outside the window. And I think that's one of the problems with some of the government programs. I was discussing this panel with Ron Hoskin, who many of you will know, who's our CFO. And he said that funding, particularly in the life science area, should not be tied to risk. That government funding, which we're really talking Ontario here, seems to be very concerned about engaging in activities that have risk. But if you're starting a life science company, there is risk, it's inherent. And you need someone to go out and take a leadership role and be your lead investor. And our feeling is that the government could take a stronger role in that, and look at not look at the possibility of failure. Like, if you're doing a startup company, you can't be concerned about failure, because they fail. And I think the government perhaps has to learn that lesson as well and be more adventurous in this sector.
Thank you. Now, Phil, you're always good for a couple of unique ideas. And Phil has, I think, expressed in the past and has his own thoughts. And I myself, and I think many of us in the room that have companies, understand the funding gap that is there in the mid-sized companies. And Phil has lived some of that as well. And maybe some comments, Phil, on both funding gap, ways in which you think might be feasible to provide solutions here in Ontario that would be different than what we're traditionally dealing with.
Thanks, Rocky. Wow, that's going to be quite the hard act to follow. So I was driving here today thinking about online dating. Well, I'm hoping you will ask why, actually. So why was I thinking about online dating, you ask? Well, let me tell you. Well, what's really cool about online dating is it's a service that matches demand with supply, right? So if you're interested in meeting somebody, in the old days, it was you could meet people that you already knew, which might not be a good idea. Or if they know me, that wouldn't be a good idea at all. So I'm better off with people I don't know. So either people that you already know or through relationships that you already have. So it's a very limited pool. So I was thinking, well, online dating is really successful because it expands the pool and it opens up the possibility of making connections that you wouldn't be able to make otherwise, at least certainly not easily. And if you're the organization who provides an online dating service, it doesn't really cost a lot of money to do that. But what it does is it allows the supply to meet the demand. It's an interesting term in online dating, but we might not want to go there. But so I was thinking about, is there a role for government to set up an online dating service? But really with the idea of matching the money with the people who need it. This is my fifth or sixth sort of startup or early stage company. So sooner or later, it always comes down to if you can't raise any money, you can't do much with it. So all the other stuff is kind of cool, but you got to have money. And I can't imagine that in today's world that the Ontario government is going to be out there writing a bunch of checks for businesses, at least not checks in the $1 million plus range. And actually, personally, I don't really want them doing that anyway, because I don't really want them picking winners and losers. The neat thing about an online dating service is they don't decide for you who you date or who you continue to date. They just provide a mechanism to get people together. And I think anybody who's been in this game before, there is money out there. Isn't a lot of it in Ontario, and there isn't a lot of it in Canada, particularly if there's a lot of risk associated with it, but it is out there. And I think there's a tremendous opportunity for Ontario to find ways to become an online dating service for biotech companies that are looking for people with money to date. Sugar daddies, I guess, is the term that they use in the online dating world, but we won't go there either. So, so I think that Ontario could take a lead in doing that and finding ways to connect people together, to make it really easy for me when I'm looking for sources of funding, and equally so to make it easy for those folks out there with money in the US or in Europe or in South America now. There's a bunch of money available in this space now and also in Asia. How do they find people in Ontario, companies to invest in? It's not easy. So I think the government could do a lot to enable that without having to spend a lot of money, and I think it would really be beneficial. So there's my idea for the day.
I told you it'd be unique. So Ann, just to wrap up on this side, and you've clearly driving the medical devices bus, and we all know that like everything else.
Not quite, but we're getting there.
You're getting there. And, but in doing that, trying to understand the path that you have to take, there's obviously a fair amount of knowledge that needs to be acquired, or a fair amount of knowledge that, if not acquired correctly, may lead you in the wrong path relative to just the regulatory pathway. And maybe you could expand a little bit on both your experiences in doing that as a young company trying to move through that maze, and help us understand what we might do different here in Ontario that could help others like you. And then at the end, if you could just comment, any comments you have on kind of life outside of the GTA, and whether you see that as having value or missing value.
Why don't I start there, actually, because I am from Kingston, Ontario, and Beacon Technologies was spun out of Queen's University, out of the Centre for Neuroscience Studies, almost 10 years ago, actually exactly 10 years ago. And I'm pleased to say we're still here, we're alive and kicking. I have 7 full-time employees, I have a payroll of $500,000 a year, we're paying taxes, and all of my employees are highly skilled individuals, PhDs down to my mechanical technologist, all skilled in our post-secondary institutions. So number one policy statement is we need knowledge professionals, and I've got them in my company. And thankfully was able to acquire them, but they certainly are a hindrance to my growth, but that's a separate issue. The biggest benefit for us being in Kingston and being born out of Queens was the ecosystem there. Small town, tight connections, couple links between people. I was working in tech transfer at the time. Our founder scientist had a great idea for his own research program. The head of our tech transfer office said, let's take a flyer. We're not really sure where this is going to go. And 10 years later, he can really say that his research has totally changed the approach to brain function and brain injury assessment. So any of you people know that anything that's going on in hockey these days, you know that concussion is just a bit of a problem. And we're finally on the cusp of being able to do something there. So the biggest benefit of being in a small town has been the connections, the closeness, and the support that it gave it to us. So in those early days, we never could have done this without the support of the tech transfer office. Now, I was actually in the tech transfer office, so obviously I'm biased, but it was those small little pots of money, our first line of credit, guaranteeing my first line of credit with the bank, being able to backstop and guarantee my lease. You know, things like this, which seem really inconsequential, the bank wasn't willing to take a risk on us, but they sure are now, 10 years later. So that has, you know, that support that we had from that tech transfer office was enormous. And dare I say, Partech's a shadow of its former self. And unfortunately, from my perspective, that's a policy change that I think is for the worse. To do tech transfer right for really hard science, which is how all of our companies are backed by really hard, solid science, which has thankfully been paid for by the Canadian taxpayer, you need those people on the ground to yank it out, commercialize it, get into the weeds, do like what I do, everything from scrubbing the toilets to cutting the invoices to getting the POs, right? You got to have people who can do that, and that's what I do in our organization. Since you asked about regulatory affairs, I'll just say very, very briefly, it is an enormous hurdle for us. And because I have the luxury of sitting on a very comfortable base revenue from neuroscientists, clinician researchers, I haven't felt forced into medical devices. We're bootstrapped. I've been selling from day one. People want to buy our stuff, and I charge them a very hefty price for it. And so I have the luxury of saying, I'm not sure I want to go to medical device. But we also know that the only reason we're doing this is to change clinical practice. And so I've got to get there. And so my number one resource issue right now, and this is a problem being in Kingston, is finding those skilled individuals who can help us help ourselves from having to learn everything from scratch, which we tend to do as being all engineers. We tend to reinvent the wheel. But finding those experts who can talk to me in 60601 third edition speak, you know, that's where we're at right now. And that's my biggest risk, because I worry if we don't get over that, we're going to miss our window of opportunity.
That's great. Oh, go ahead. What's that?
So great stuff. Everybody here, great comments. I just want to correct at least one point, and that is that the Ontario government actually has been really supportive. And one of the advantages of going into the university was I got to take advantage of their largesse in great measure. But maybe the more important thing I wanted to bring up was that although you can get money, and there's money to be got in different places, what we really need is knowledge. And the fundamental thing that changed our ability to transform from an early stage company into a mid-stage company was a mentorship that we were given through the Ontario Institute for Cancer Research. And they have a intellectual property development commercialization program that I think is just outstanding. They gave us a CEO advisor who actually had failed at a company, which is really good experience. He'd also been successful in a company. He brought in yet another advisor. So I would say if there's some way to develop a mentorship community that, even though I had 25 years in industry, I really wasn't knowledgeable enough at the CEO level, and I needed that support. So that is one thing I throw out.
Great. And just, Anne, I was just wondering also if your negotiations as a CEO with the Tech Transfer Office over IP, was that different than other CEOs?
No. I have a very, and Phil knows this, I hope, because I negotiated one of your licenses when I was there. But no, we have a very, I think a very, high market value license agreement, exclusive license agreement with the university. Thankfully, they have done an astounding job at managing my intellectual property portfolio. I return to them about $40,000 a year in royalties, and they're quite happy to receive that. Thank you very much.
That's great. Yeah. That's great. So I'm going to turn it to you in the audience today, because rather than asking more questions here, I want the stuff to come this way. We have a good 10, 15 minutes, and after that you'll be talking to yourself. But let's get a couple questions. And feel free to either direct it to individuals on the panel as they're unique to what it is your question is, or feel free to ask a broad question of the panel. And here comes David to the stand.
Thank you, Rocky. David Allen, Avid Biologics. So Ilya, you mentioned National Research Council. That organization has had its mandate changed by our Prime Minister. But what is Avid's relationship with National Research Council? What kind of resources do they provide to your company, and what does Avid do for NRC in return?
Thank you for that question. Yeah, I think it's a very interesting and important part of our story, and I hope that more and more companies will be able to sort of have a similar story now that NRC's mandate has been very clarified and focused on what we've gone for. So we've been working with NRC, I would say, over the last 6 years, I would say, and we started working with a specific group now called Human Health Therapeutics Group at that time, and then before they actually had a new mandate established, which was established about a year ago. The new mandate is build the industry and help Canadian biotech companies establish themselves. And that's a very, and then not only, it's a mandate, but they actually have very rigorous measurements related to that. So they're not measured by a number of publications or a number of patents they filed, or whatever that is. They're measured by how successful the companies that they work with are. And so, and that really focused, I think I would argue that the team we were working on was already focused on this, but it made the entire organization very, very collaborative. And we've certainly, I would say us and another company called Zymeworks have both benefited tremendously from that. So the resources that we have available, I mean, we do all of our discovery work with the NRC. We do a lot of proof of principle work with the NRC. We do all sorts of activities that prepare us for the transfer of our technologies to the Canadian contract manufacturers or Canadian research organizations such as Charles River, et cetera, ITR in Montreal. And that enables us to really not only, that enables us to really cross the chasm where, this is the most difficult stage, developing these new methods of productions or new methods of assaying your molecule cost effectively. And that's without NRC. I mean, that's actually, if you read our press releases, all of them say basically technology is a spin out from YM, but it was co-founded on our work with the National Research Council. So I think, frankly, NRC provides an exceptional model for maybe some other centers that we have in Canada. I think it's a worthwhile case study because they have been so enormously successful and because there are so many biotech companies that resulted from that center. And I would say that, just to build on that, I think there's a tremendous amount of resources here in the GTA related to R&D. I mean, we have some of the strongest research centers. We've had trouble with some of them accessing their resources or structuring collaborations. Has been either slow or they're a bit apprehensive about industry. There have been challenges. And I think maybe one way to overcome that and open up a lot of these resources, R&D resources that we have in the community, is to actually look at the NRC model and implement some of these philosophies and maybe the measurements that they use to help companies like us accelerate their growth. So that's my comment.
So my name is Giovanna Labarda, and I'm here on behalf of the NRC. So thank you very much for praising the NRC.
There was no setup.
I don't even know him. So.
I think her and David were in the back talking.
So, one of the things, this is more of a comment and great discussion by all the panelists. One of the things I would urge everyone to do is to look into NRC programs. There are various programs and various ways of de-risking your operations, from the startup to commercialization, and we definitely offer innovative ways to do that. So I would definitely encourage everyone to look into what the NRC has to offer. That's all.
Yeah, please.
Certainly, I will thank NRC for the support we received through IRAP. But, there reaches a point, and I guess we're lucky if we're not having to, really count the pennies, where these small little pots of money are just not worth it. And it is my biggest beef with IRAP, be it with FedDev, be it, especially with FedDev, don't get me started on FedDev. The time investment to manage these ridiculously peanut-sized pots of money and accountability is just a total freaking waste of time. And I would honestly stress any small company to run from the small money. It's just not worth it. If that's all you got, that's all you got.
May I
But you're better off going and finding a customer, getting a purchase order, and selling something.
So I would, in some instances, I would agree with you very strongly. In fact, I had to become a writer, writing all of this stuff up and getting these little pots of money. It was amazing. So I would actually add to that. I think, not with all programs, but with many programs, I think that's a big issue. Again, I would go back to this very small pots of money called Business Accelerator Program for executive in residence, et cetera. But it's very simple, very effective, and I think it's not a lot of write-ups. The reports are 1 page or 2 pages. So I think that's another good example of things that are working. And I think it's really important for some of these smaller pots of money, especially, is just, as entrepreneurs, we're taking most of the risk. I mean, you could trust us a little bit more. We don't need to write 100 pages. We have more skin in the game than anybody else. So just, I would think of that. And philosophically, I think that's an important thing to realize.
Yeah, if I could come to the defense of NRC as well. I think some of the new initiatives, particularly in IRAP, are leading to shorter proposals. The latest one we wrote was a maximum of 6 pages.
Just to be clear, my beef is not with the proposals, and I'm very appreciative of IRAP funding. It's the follow-up of the, for example, FedDev in-kind support, the hours and hours and hours I spent justifying my in-kind contribution so that money could flow to Queens or to Sunnybrook, never to me. That's where things have just gone totally off the rails.
And maybe I would clarify, NRC and NRC IRAP are two related, but they're very, very different things in what they actually do for companies. So, my understanding is NRC has been restructured, but NRC IRAP may not have been. Yeah.
Any more comments? If not, we'll take another one from the floor.
So I'm Brenda Hogan with the Ontario Capital Growth Corporation. I heard one or two people on the panel talk about the issue of attracting the right type of talent. So what I'm curious about from your perspective, if you can speak a little bit to it, is it that the right talent just doesn't exist, or it exists but it's very junior, it needs to be more seasoned, or is it that it exists but just won't move to where you're located? And then expand a bit on, what do you think needs to happen to sort of solve that issue that you're facing?
Yeah, I can start on that one. I mean, I think the talent is available here in Ontario, and there are programs which have supported that. My tax program, which I think is the Feds, and NSERC, again, the Feds, and then there was a program for graduate initiatives that allowed companies to employ people with high skills who are generally, postdoc type people, early stage people. But in terms of attracting other people, I mean, the industry in Ontario is quite mature now. And, biotech companies like Allelix and Cangene started in the early 80s. And so there are a large number of people out there who are seasoned in the industry. And I guess I should mention YM here as well. But I think people are there, but perhaps there could be more consideration of hiring experienced people under the same type of programs where there's an offset of salary or 6 months introducing someone to a company. That would certainly be advantageous to us.
From my very special perspective, I had enormous amount of technology talent, largely because we had it from the University of Toronto and because I got to hire everybody from my prior company who wanted to come with me. But the limitation I had really was on business expertise and writing a business model. I'm a scientist, I don't write business models. So the OICR funded a person as a consultant to me to write my business model. And then they provided me, at no cost to me and no obligation to me, there was no shareholding in the company that came out of that, just business mentorship that allowed me to train me how to give venture capital pitches. And they stayed with me for 3 years while I made multiple pitches that I actually got fairly decent at the end. So I think the kind of talent that I was looking at bringing in is not the talent that we pay for or that has a stake in the company, but just knowledge that is brought in some kind of a round table or sit down once a month or once a week and talk things out. There's a CEO networking group that was fabulous for me as a CEO. CEO is the most lonely job in the world. And networking groups allow you to share your knowledge with others without risking things. And the same thing I think happens in an early stage company. If you could just have a network that teaches you the stuff you need to do to make a successful company, it would be really helpful to help us pure technology nerds.
Another comment, or if not, we got
a quick comment on that. We have, at LSO, we've set up a CEO networking group. So this is good input because that may be something that we can build on. But I do have a question. It sort of follows on the dating idea, a different idea for raising money. Has anybody had any experience with crowdsourced funding? And do you see that as a way of generating money for startups?
I don't think any of us have. And
I
I think,
have.
did you, Phil?
My
Yeah.
son asked me to do that just this week. But I mean, it's my son's age group, not my age group.
Yeah, I only have a small amount of experience with crowdsourcing, and it works like a charm for sort of socially beneficial, sort of really early, sort of, because I happen to be a wannabe musician on the side, and so, you know, raising money to do music stuff, people do that kind of silly stuff, right? And you can, I was surprised, I actually could get people to pay money to have me play music, which surprised me. Usually they're more willing to pay more money to get me to stop. But in all seriousness, I'm a little bit skeptical about crowdsourcing for the kind of stuff that we do. If I was a regulator, and luckily for everybody I'm not, I would really worry about, in business startups, how you actually make sure that scams don't go nutso. And because it's one thing to put $5 into somebody's pet project to paint a tree orange or something, but it's another thing to be trying to raise the kind of money that businesses need in order to get started up and manage all of that and control it. I just don't know how you do it. It'd be wonderful if you could, but I don't know how you do it.
Any other experiences to share on that? Okay. You have enough?
So while I have the 1 sec on the microphone, just as a bit of a contrarian position, you know, personally speaking, I would be in favor of enhanced government funding for hiring people. Other than maybe first job stuff, I kind of like that. But really, you know, I'm happy to hire the people that I need with the experience that I need and pay what I need. What we need help with is getting the company properly financed so that we can do that. Rather than, I can just imagine the layers of bureaucracy to every time you hire an individual, there's all these forms to fill out and all this other stuff. I would rather focus, for me anyway, on getting startup businesses financed. Help them do that, and then they can look after hiring the talent that they need, and there's lots and lots of it around here.
And maybe I'll just briefly add to that. I think also just maybe more openness to little companies, not just hiring full-time people, but also I think consultants should be looked at as more philosophically as mentors. I mean, just like you were referring to, because in fact, you know, in my case, and I think in many cases here, we need very specialized skills. So what we need to do frequently is go out there in the world, find the person with the best experience in the world, and then hire him as a consultant. But really, he's a mentor to our labor force to grow these skills inside our company. So when you're supporting a consultant, it doesn't mean that money is wasted on a non-Canadian. I think it's money that actually enhances the skills of Canadian companies if we are able to access that.
Question. I recognize we have a range of various companies here, but we heard this morning that there is a tremendous need for a Canadian success story to serve as a catalyst. The trouble is, you know, you need serious money, and the serious money isn't available in Canada. But going from across, is your intention, I'm asking each of you, is to stay Canadian or to try and stay Canadian? Is that your wish?
Go ahead and start, we'll walk across, and I think that'll give us all the time that we have today.
Our intention is, I mean, our intention is to stay Canadian and do as much as we can in Canada. I think there's, I think, you know, I'm extremely optimistic about what we have here. I mean, there's sort of a, I see, you know, there's a critical mass accumulating, and if you look at the S innovation curves, I think there's now a buildup of resources, a lot of people trying to do many new things. I think there's going to be a lot of catalysts over the next few years, and I think the success stories that we're talking about are coming. Good. So, and I think, you know, the support programs that we discussed, particularly the NRC, they create a lot of stickiness that any investor from around the world will understand that, you know, there is a benefit to keeping a company here. And I think, you know, we have to keep building the environment and the ecosystem with that in mind. We shouldn't be scared of foreign money, but we have to make sure that they understand how good it is to be here.
Good.
I've stated my personal opinion. My founders share that opinion. If you ask all my employees, they'll also share the same thing. I have 100 votes right now for staying in Canada and 0 for leaving.
Good.
Yeah, I think it depends what you mean by being a Canadian company. Our company is based on technology that was heavily invested in by Ontario through OCE and other programs at the University of Guelph, and we've spun that out and commercialized it with the help of the feds in Ontario. But Our lead investor is from England. Our second biggest investor is from Dubai. So the people who will benefit from the success of our organization in terms of financial return are going to be Walter Scott in the UK and Ahmed and Dave in Dubai. If we're going to establish manufacturing facilities, we're in discussions with the government of Brazil about building a facility for the order of 17 to 20 million that would be financed 100% by Brazil. The discussions we've had with Ontario and the feds here are that we would achieve 25% from the governments, which is a significant contribution, but the contribution's not the same. So if we are able to raise 15 million to build a facility in Ontario, we would do that when it's the right time in the drug development. But if we're not, we have to take advantage of the opportunities elsewhere. I mean, I see our company staying as a Canadian company, like registered here in Ontario, but the benefits might not all come to Ontario and Canada.
Okay.
It's all about the money, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, do we all want to stay in Canada? Hell yeah. That's not a problem. But the money, you know, at least for us, is likely going to come from outside of Canada. So I think we're going to end up being a business that lives in Canada and does its business from Canada, but is owned by non-Canadians, and that's life.
Yeah.
I would just repeat that. You know, you want to be able to maximize the return of your technology, and that doesn't mean you put up unnecessary barriers by saying, oh, it has to be in Canada. So if the money comes from outside, if the partnerships come from outside, which is really what I'm seeking, you know, I want to deal with the GE Siemens of the world. That's what we want. That means taking the technology out, so be it. But we know that they will always keep the science based in Canada. And, you know, as all have iterated here, you know, I feel like I owe an enormous debt and have an enormous gratitude to the Canadian taxpayer, because we have access to the crown jewels of a really key neuroscience program. And it's now my responsibility to make sure that everybody gets the benefit of them. I'll go to where the money is to do that.
All right, so, Jason, you got
Can you do one last quick one? We got
as long
time.
as you don't go across the board with the
I won't.
question.
I'll put it out to the panel. Some of the data that we presented earlier on took a look at the public capital markets, in particular the TSX and the TSXV, and a comparison towards NASDAQ. One of the things that I didn't talk about was the incredible number of IPOs over the last year in life sciences south of the border. We haven't seen that level of activity on the TSX. Why don't we have more life sciences companies in Canada going the IPO route? Just your thoughts on that.
Yeah,
Take a first shot.
I'll take a first shot at that. I think there's many good reasons for not going the IPO or the listing route. You know, there's a lot of cost, there's a lot of time invested in dealing with your investors. So I don't necessarily see that as a negative. I think, yeah.
Any other comments, Scott?
I mean, from my perspective, I just don't see the possibility of ever getting there, because if we're successful, we will be a target for a strategic acquisition, and it won't be possible for us to withstand that. If we're not successful, then maybe we'll go to the stock exchange and try and stay alive that way. But I mean, realistically, in this space, because the opportunity is so big, the big guys are already circling. You can see the vultures when you look up.
There's no point in having an IPO if you don't have liquidity, right, at the end of the day. So why beat your head against the wall? Work with a private investor.
Great. Yeah, I have my own views on that topic as well, and having successfully done an IPO on the NASDAQ many years ago, I think one of the big differences is that you can raise $80 million on the NASDAQ, and you can raise $8 million here and then fight as a non-covered public company, which is probably the only death worse than a private company. So I think that that's the Rocky view, and I won't comment on anything else we've done today. At the same time, I want to thank the panel. I think we've had both some very positive things about some of the programs that we've been able to talk to, so I think that's great. I don't like panels where all we do is get up here and complain, so I think we've heard great things about the changes at NRC. We've heard a desire to move some of the practices of the NRC over into the IRAP program, if at all possible, to try to smooth that out. I think we've heard mixed reactions on academic and IP. We've had really good experiences and maybe some challenging experiences from some of the others. And I think as far as the academia industry collaborations, I will break my rule and comment one more, because there was a lot of discussion by Scott on kind of the model of the chemistry department at U of T. And I do think that the direction of that group has done a great job in learning how to work directly with industry, and I think it's a model that could be copied as a model within other groups within the university structures. So with that, unless there's any other comments, I'm going to let my colleagues that need to go to the airport and myself that needs to get to a board meeting to do so, and thank you very much.